tranquil day. Rudeus was cooking and thinking about the man-god. What was nagging at him? Things had worked out too smoothly in Sharon. He'd made mistakes, using the Night of the Shadow Moon name, writing his real name in the letter, and yet the outcome had been optimal, which suggested the man-god's advice was less a strict path than a set of guidelines, ensuring the destination stayed the same, regardless of how Rudeus fumbled the route. If he'd used his real name with Aisha, she'd have found him out immediately. They'd have found her anyway. He was starting to provisionally trust the man-god. He still couldn't figure out what the man-god actually wanted, which remained the more concerning issue. Meanwhile, Eris and Ruijerd were sparring. This had stopped being a visual spectacle and become a humbling one. A year ago, Rudeus could have beaten Eris easily with his demon eye and a bit of mana. He might even have managed to pull her panties down during the fight, if he really wanted to, which he acknowledged was not a reasonable metric. Now, impossible. She would absolutely win if they came to close quarters. He'd probably survive if the battle started at a distance and he used everything he had, but a long-distance battle with Eris was essentially an admission that he was afraid of her, so you couldn't call it a victory. Her hard work made his look mediocre. He was working hard by his own standards, which were Japanese standards, which were apparently insufficient. The training ended. Eris, Ruijerd said as she walked over. She took the wet rag Rudeus handed her and slipped it inside her clothes to wipe the sweat. She used to strip down to her bra, but Rudeus had gotten too visibly affected by that, so she now did it covered. He apologized internally. From this day on, you can call yourself a warrior. Eris's hand went still under her armpit. Does that mean? You're an adult now, Ruijerd said. She tossed the rag back to Rudeus without looking at him. He could see the enormous smile threatening to explode across her face, being held back with visible effort because she felt she needed to act more reserved. But Ruijerd, I still haven't defeated you at all. That's not a problem. You have sufficient strength as a warrior. Congratulations, Eris, Rudeus said. Her eyes darted to him in surprise. Rudeus, this isn't a dream, is it? Could you pinch me? You won't punch me if I do? I won't punch you. With that assurance, Rudeus reached out and pinched her nipple. Eris's fist hit his jaw hard enough to see stars. Where the hell are you pinching? Sorry, but it's not a dream. If it was, this wouldn't hurt so bad. His face had gone pale, hers had gone red, and she'd crossed her arms over her chest. That's right, a warrior. She stared at the palm of her hand. Don't get a big head, Ruijerd warned. That means I'm not going to treat you like a child anymore. Yeah! She was clearly trying not to grin. Dinner tasted better than usual. Rudeus was not sure if this was the cooking or the mood. That night, after Eris was asleep, Rudeus found himself unable to shake a feeling he couldn't name. Why did you say that to Eris? He asked Ruijerd, who had his eyes closed on lookout. Because no matter how much time passes, you keep treating her like she's a child. Rudeus contemplated this. Was Eris a child? She was 20 years younger than he had been when he died in his previous life. He had been her tutor. He had watched her use him as a personal punching bag for years. He had extensive, perhaps excessive, experience of her as a student who was still developing her grasp of consequences. She had also, recently and undeniably, become quite capable of beating him up. Said Rudeus. Ah, well, it's all right if you don't understand, said Ruijerd. The feeling was immediate and familiar. This was a pre-death conversation. On television, characters said things like this right before they got killed off. Rudeus recognized the genre convention. Mr. Ruijerd, please put this gold coin in your breast pocket. He didn't have a pocket in his vest. He managed to tuck the coin into a seam near his breast. And this is a good luck charm. Satisfied, Rudeus went to sleep. A few days later, they arrived at the entrance to the Asura kingdom, the red worm's lower jaw. A man was coming from the opposite direction, walking. Silver hair, golden eyes with small irises that showed white all the way around, a white leather coat with no real armor to speak of. Rudeus's assessment, that man has a dangerous look in his eyes. His attention was more drawn to the person behind him, a girl with dark brown hair and a pure white face mask with no decoration on it. Nothing drawn on it. No expression, like a peel-off face mask from a cosmetics store, except worn over an actual human face in a ravine in the middle of nowhere. Once you saw it, you wouldn't forget it. Rudeus was so busy looking at the girl that he almost missed the fact that Ruijerd, sitting in the driver's seat, had gone white as a sheet. Eris's knuckles on her sword hilt had turned white from gripping it. The man noticed them. He tilted his head. Could you be a superd? Rudeus's question, was this someone they knew, died on his lips when he saw Ruijerd's expression. Cold sweat, trembling hand on the spear, that was fear. Rudeus had not seen Ruijerd afraid before. Rudeus, whatever you do, don't move. Eris, you either. The man recognized Ruijerd, despite the shaved head, commented on his fondness for children, on Eris's name, deduced from context that these were the two who'd been teleported and were being escorted home. He seemed cheerful about this. Not offensively so. There was just a quality to his flat voice that sounded almost like warmth, as if he'd run into people he liked. This was baffling, given that both Eris and Ruijerd were clearly treating him as the most dangerous thing they'd ever seen. Ruijerd thrust his spear at the man anyway. The man stepped to the side and indicated he'd stay out of their way. The girl with the mask muttered, "Are you sure?" He said it was unavoidable. He walked past. "Please wait." Rudeus called him back before he knew he was going to. He introduced himself. The man said he'd never heard of him, then asked about Rudeus's parents. Rudeus told him Paul Greyrat. The man looked confused. Paul should only have 2 daughters. Rudeus resisted the urge to point out that he was standing right there. The man approached, said he had no memory of meeting Rudeus, that Rudeus didn't seem to feel fear. Rudeus confirmed he'd like to turn his eyes away as soon as possible because the look in the man's eyes was terrifying, but he was not technically afraid. He asked about the displacement incident. The man denied any knowledge. Rudeus apologized for stopping him, started to bow. Are you perhaps familiar with the name Man-God? Rudeus had been keeping the Man-God's name out of every conversation for weeks. He had specifically trained himself to avoid it. But the conversation was apparently over, his guard was down, and someone had just said the name out loud, as if they both already knew it. So naturally, I do. He's appeared in my dream. The man's hand was at his chest. Rudeus's demon eye showed it 1 second in advance. 1 second was not enough time to do anything. The only thing that stopped it was Ruijerd putting himself between them, the force throwing Rudeus backward. "So that's it," the man said. "You're one of the Man-God's disciples. Rudeus, run!" Ruijerd was not defeated slowly. 10 seconds with the demon eye. Every move Ruijerd made, he was at a slight disadvantage. Orsted moved minimally, optimally, at exactly the right distances, drawing Ruijerd into positions where each attack cost more balance than it gained. Accumulation of small disadvantages until there was nowhere left to go. Fist to the solar plexus, one that grazed the chin, the third to the temple. 3 punches. Ruijerd crumpled. Orsted had held back. That was the part that stayed with Rudeus. Then Eris launched from his blind spot, fast as an arc of light, no hesitation, everything committed to attack. Secret technique, flow. Orsted gently stopped her sword with his palm. Eris went spinning through the air and hit the cliff face hard enough to crack the rock. He commented on her potential and noted she was still unpolished. She groaned on the ground. The demon eye was useless now. Rudeus kept it active, watching 1 second into the future, and saw nothing but ways to die. Head, throat, heart, lungs, destroyed, regardless of what he chose. And Orsted standing still, he couldn't move. The second passed. Orsted appeared in front of him, the way animation appears when there aren't enough frames. 6 ribs fractured simultaneously, then simultaneous pressure from behind. His lungs were crushed. Blood came up through his throat. "It's best to collapse a magician's lungs," Orsted said, not unkindly, as Rudeus went to his knees. "When you die, be sure to deliver a message to the Man-God for me. Tell him that the Dragon God Orsted will be the one to kill him." He started to walk away. Rudeus launched a stone cannon at him. He didn't know why he used his weakest spell. He'd never figured out the answer. It was probably just the most familiar thing in his hands. He put everything he had into it. Fastest spin, hardest rock, full mana. The stone went red hot, travelling the short distance. Orsted looked back and smashed it with his fist. The skin of his fist was peeled slightly. Rudeus had barely grazed him, and Orsted acknowledged this as impressive. He asked questions about the voiceless magic, about what the man-god had given Rudeus, watching him with the detached curiosity of someone observing an interesting insect. Rudeus conjured wind to force air into his destroyed lungs. Then fire magic. Orsted said that's enough, aimed one hand, disturb magic, and the mana at Rudeus's fingertips dispersed. His right hand sealed. He used his left instead, generating a shockwave, both thrown back. Orsted, surprised, snapped his fingers and produced a square window, front wormgate. Rudeus fired everything he had. Orsted swallowed most of it. The frame cracked. A diminished explosion, easily avoided. What incredible mana capacity. It's almost as if you're on the same level as Laplace. Rudeus had stopped thinking by then. He tried the Doldia village roar on a whim. He coughed blood instead. Magic sealed, legs stopped. Well, no matter. Die. Through the chest. Heart. He tried to gather mana anyway. It would heal. 2 more years he'd promised Eris. Wah! Eris, listing every name she knew. Ruijerd, Ghislaine, her grandfather, her parents, Paul. Anyone. He didn't want to die. Hey, Orsted, wouldn't it be better to just let him live? Then, white. The man-god was standing in the white room, smile in place. This time it didn't annoy Rudeus. He had a gaping hole in his chest, which was too conclusive to feel angry about. His hostility had apparently exhausted itself somewhere in the act of dying. He asked about Orsted. The man-god couldn't see anything involving the dragon god due to a curse. Orsted had 4 curses total. One made every living being hate or fear him without exception, which explained why Rudeus hadn't felt it. Was Orsted beatable? No. Strongest in the world, even restricted by curses, with access to every skill currently existing plus his own dragon god magic. And Ruijerd's curse, yes, a transferable curse from Laplace, via his spear, via the tribe's green hair. Fading. Ruijerd's personal curse had already been significantly reduced by cutting his hair. Rudeus processed this. He suggested some friendly activities for their future relationship, dancing naked, drawing faces on their bellies. The man-god looked at him with concern. You've lost all hope and given up. The complete opposite of when we first met, no? Rudeus explained. He'd had a feeling he'd end up here when he died. He wasn't particularly upset about it. Well, then I have good news for you. The hole in his chest disappeared. He woke up to Eris's face, upside down above him because his head was in her lap. She'd been crying. She'd also set up camp by herself. Carriage pulled aside, fire going, Ruijerd laid out at the edge of the road. Why am I alive? The hole in his chest had been welded shut. He coughed blood. Eris explained incoherently that the girl, Nanahoshi, had said something, and Orsted had used magic to heal him. Nanahoshi. Rudeus felt like he'd heard that name somewhere. Couldn't place it. He was alive. He'd been utterly defeated, then healed by the person who defeated him, on a whim. The world's strongest person had pierced his heart, watched him try to fight back with a stone cannon, fought him for several more minutes in that condition, and then, apparently on a suggestion from his masked companion, healed him. This was probably what you felt when you'd been run over by a truck that also circled back to check if you were okay. Being alive was a wonderful thing. Rudeus said this out loud while wrapping his arms around Eris's waist and pressing his face into her. Rudeus, you're awfully enthusiastic. Everything just seems to be overflowing. Then I'm fine to hit you, right? Her voice was trembling, which was different from its usual certain quality. Sure, go ahead. She punched him. Then she pulled him toward her and wrapped both arms around his head. Her chest was warm against his cheek, and he could hear her heart pounding. From above came quiet sobs. Thank God, she whispered. He patted her back. Eris had stopped giving him space in the carriage. She sat right next to him, thighs touching. She no longer moved away when he reached out. Rudeus kept his hands occupied, practicing disturb magic. Generate mana with one hand, disrupt it with the other, the way Orsted had sealed his hands entirely. What he could manage so far was ruining his own stone cannons. Small, misshapen rocks hitting the carriage floor. The mechanics were becoming clearer. Eventually, he might be able to disrupt disturb magic from an external source. A possibility. Eris watched the collapsing stones. Asked why he was doing something like that. So that if we ever meet Orsted again, I can get away from him, he said. She went quiet. Then, why are you so strong? He told her she was stronger than him. She said that wasn't true at all. The conversation stalled. Are you worried about how easily you were defeated the other day? Yeah. It wasn't her fault. Orsted was the dragon god, restricted by 4 curses, and still operating on a plane that didn't connect to normal effort. Some ceilings were just too high. He's an unfair opponent. It's not your fault. But you're still young. You'll get stronger. Eris looked at him directly. You know you almost died, right? How can you say that so easily? Because the only strategy he had in mind for a future Orsted encounter was to run away at maximum speed, or to hide. He might also consider begging. He prayed Eris would not have to witness that particular event. Because I don't want to die next time, he said. True, you don't want to die, do you? I'm going to work hard enough that if we're ever in another dangerous situation, I'll be able to pick you up and run. She leaned her head against his shoulder. He was in the middle of casting disturb magic with his right hand, which was unfortunate. Another failed stone cannon hit the carriage floor. Well, no matter what happens, we've got to get a little stronger. Just a little bit more. He wasn't becoming the strongest person in the world. Nobody was becoming the strongest person in the world except Orsted, apparently. But strong enough to run away from weird encounters with gods was a reasonable goal. He pressed his face into Eris's hair and inhaled. The night after they arrived in the Asura kingdom, with Eris asleep, Rudeus finally told Ruijerd about the man-god. He'd been sitting with it for a while, but the man-god's name had already surfaced in the worst possible way, and there was no longer a reason to keep hiding it. He told him everything, the appearance in dreams since the displacement incident, the advice about Ruijerd, the advice about Aisha, the man-god and dragon god being enemies. He narrated it as completely as he could. Ruijerd listened in silence. Then he asked about the curse. Rudeus told him what the man-god had said, that the Supid tribe's bad reputation was a curse transferred from Laplace to his spear and thence to the tribe, but that it was fading, slowly, with time. That Ruijerd's individual curse had already been significantly reduced by cutting his hair. Ruijerd shouted it so suddenly that Eris rolled over in her sleep. Are you serious? Yeah. He said what remains now is mainly the curse's traces and the prejudices it created. The reputation can recover, depending on how hard you work. Ruijerd went silent. The fire crackled. In the dancing light, something worked in his face, the expression of someone who had been holding a very heavy thing for a very long time and had just been told they might someday be allowed to set it down. Well then, it's about time I got to bed, Rudeus said, making an excuse to look away. Ruijerd had tears streaming down his face, and Ruijerd was a reliable warrior who did not cry. A month of travel north through small farming villages and wheat fields and watermills. They didn't stop for information, they just moved. The Fittoa region was empty. Not metaphorically. Where there had been wheat fields, there was nothing. Where there had been vatirus flowers, grass, where buildings had stood, cleared ground. The refugee camp was the only inhabited place left. Rudeus held the hollowness of this site inside him as they arrived. Before they reached the gate, Ruijerd stopped the carriage. This is where I take my leave. Rudeus and Eris nearly fell out of the carriage, standing up. But Ruijerd explained, with the measured tone of someone who had decided not to change his mind, that they were warriors now and didn't need his protection. This was technically true. It also felt like having the floor removed from beneath them. Rudeus tried to articulate 3 years of complicated feeling in the time available. Ruijerd talked him through it. He'd reached a kind of perfection that was rare as a magician. The man-god may have advised him, but the work had been Rudeus's own. When Rudeus started to bow, Ruijerd stopped him. They were equals. He gripped Rudeus's hand. Thank you, Rudeus, for all you did for me. And the same to you. Thank you for everything. Rudeus's eyes stung. He kept a straight face. Ruijerd turned to Eris. Can I treat you as a child this one last time? Fine, whatever, she said, very quietly. He stroked her head. Eris, you have talent. Enough to become far stronger than me. She started to object. She'd lost to Orsted. But Ruijerd cut her off with the phrase he always used in training. You survived an attack in battle from a man who bears the name of a god. Understand what that means? Her eyes widened. She nodded. Ruijerd removed the Roxy pendant from around his neck and held it out. Rudeus told him to keep it. Ruijerd looked at him. Are you sure? Isn't it important to you? That's exactly why I want you to keep it. Ruijerd nodded, tucked the pendant away, and turned to walk. He stopped once. That reminds me, if I have any free time, I'll see about looking for your mother. Then he walked away until he was gone. Let's meet again, Rudeus said to his receding silhouette, meaning every word. The refugee camp was the size of a village, silent and half-empty. Before they reached the gate, the smell reached them first. Not one thing, but several layered together into something with no pleasant component. Cook smoke, but the thin kind that comes from burning wet wood or poor fuel. Unwashed cloth. Something sour underneath. The persistent smell of too many people sharing too little ventilation for too long. The wind off the plain was cold at this hour, the specific cold of open ground that had nothing to slow it down, and it cut through the camp's smells and sharpened them without improving them. The tents were grey from weather. Some of the support posts had been repaired with different timber, paler, visibly newer than everything around it. The vatirus flowers Rudeus remembered growing around Roa in abundance were gone, not cut back, simply absent, as if the soil had decided against them. Where there had been market activity and noise, there was careful quiet. The kind of quiet that camps develop when they have been camps for long enough that it no longer seems temporary. The headquarters building was a log construction near the middle. Inside was a list on the wall: Fittoa Liege, Lord James Boreas Greyrat, seeking status information, deceased or missing. The names below were alphabetical by village. There were many of them. The liege lord at the top wasn't Sauros. That detail settled uneasily. When they gave Eris's name at the counter, Eris Boreas Greyrat, Rudeus watched the clerk's face do something involuntary. Not hostility. More like the specific expression of someone who has been trained to remain neutral and is performing that training at above-average effort. He filed this away. Greyrat, the name that until recently had meant a minor but functional entry in the index of people worth knowing. Philip Greyrat, steward, political operator, man with connections. Sauros, lord of Fittoa, a big loud man who had run his region with the blunt effectiveness of someone who cared more about results than appearances. Between them, a name that opened doors. Now, the name of the household that had governed when the displacement incident happened. The name of the man who had been executed to absorb the political cost of the natural disaster he couldn't have predicted. The name that was on the list on the wall under deceased. He had spent 3 years being proud to work for that family, in the quiet way you were proud of people who didn't embarrass you. That had apparently, without anyone informing him, become a liability he'd inherited on arrival. When they gave Eris's name at the counter, 2 familiar faces appeared. Alphonse, who had aged and gone more grey-white. Ghislaine, dark-skinned and sword-equipped, intact and apparently well, which was more than Rudeus had known about her for the last 3 years. Eris's face lit up. She ran to Ghislaine. Ghislaine's expression went warm and then immediately clouded. Her tail stood straight up. She was nervous. Eris, let's talk further in. They went to a workroom. Sofa, vase with a vatirus flower, plain desk in the corner. Alphonse tried to keep Rudeus out. Eris said Rudeus would come too, in a tone that ended the discussion. Eris asked without preamble, "Cut the courtesies and just say it. Who died?" Her hands were fists in her lap. She was holding her breath in the specific way she held it when she was trying not to show that she was scared. Alphonse forced out the words. Lord Sauros, Lord Philip, and Lady Hilda, all 3 of them are deceased. Her fingers closed on Rudeus's hand hard enough to make him see stars. Philip and Hilda had been teleported together and died in the conflict zone. Ghislaine had come across the bodies on her own way through. She didn't describe the condition of the remains. Her expression was enough. Sauros had been executed, forced to take responsibility for the displacement incident, which was absurd, which was a natural disaster, which he could not have prevented, except that it didn't matter, because hundreds of thousands of people had suffered, and someone had to be the scapegoat, and the political calculations that followed were what they were. Rudeus stood up without noticing he was going to. What meaning would there be in executing Lord Sauros? Rudeus, sit. Eris pulled his hand. He sat. He hadn't done anything useful with the standing, anyway. He understood the logic. He just understood it with the part of his mind that processed information, not the part that was currently sitting with the image of that enormous old man who had been alive when they left. "So what am I supposed to do?" Eris asked. Her voice was quiet, flat in a way he hadn't heard from her before. Alphonse looked at her. "Lord Pilamon Notos Greyrat has said he would welcome you as his concubine, Lady Eris." Pausa. Ghislaine's murderous intent hit the room like weather. "Alphonse, you bastard, do you seriously intend for her to take that offer? If we're to think of the future of the Fittoa region, as if she could ever be happy being married to a man like that. He's filth, but he has a distinguished family name. I don't care how many. Are you even thinking about Eris at all?" "I'm thinking about the Boreas family and the Fittoa region." "Enough." Eris stood. Her bellow was the fullest she'd had in months, the kind Rudeus hadn't heard her use in a while. It silenced both of them. She stood with her legs spread and her chin up and everything composed and solid, except for the way her voice fell to almost nothing after. "Just leave me by myself. I want to think." Alphonse left. Ghislaine followed, after a long, reluctant look. "Eris, Rudeus, did you not hear me? Leave me alone for now." This was the first time in years she had pushed him away. He stood in the hallway with his hand still reaching for the door he'd just closed, and heard from behind it the sound of a sob.